After a decade and a half of it being cancelled, despite some hope in the mid-90s, Doctor Who gets revived with a new doctor, a new look, a new format, and new ideas with Russell T Davies at the helm. Let's get into it. First, we shall get into the good stories with number 10, and that is The End of the World. Despite being the lowest, this is definitely not a bad story. However, there are bits and pieces that annoy me personally and are a bit dated. Mainly the CGI with the robot spider things, as well as being very overlit like the earlier episodes were. However, the villain Cassandra was nothing short of exceptional. She was so creepy and well utilized within the story. While her plans are just that she's a greedy bitch is a bit one note, the performance in and of itself was fantastic. I think the toll that the first adventure takes on Rose was also a really interesting idea, and something that wasn't touched upon much in the classic era. Her dealing with all the aliens and the situation she's in was very good, as well as how that feeds into the Doctor's arc and of what happened during the Time War, and what he did was very well written. So why is this so low? The dated aspects in terms of the pop music was a bit eye-rolling, and some of the other music choices throughout the episode feeling a bit off, as well as being a bit cheesy in tone, and as I said, the villain being pretty one-note. But considering everything, it's still a good episode. Next up is number 9 with Rose. Another good episode that unfortunately falters because of datedness. Again, it is terribly overlit, and the effects in terms of the CGI in regards to the Autons is really bad. I can't falter Doctor Who for bad effects, but I am more forgiving for bad practicals than I am for bad CGI. That's just a personal preference for me, though. Everything outside of that, though, is very good. The mystery of the Doctor is re-established, I think, when he becomes this mysterious figure again, thanks to seeing everything through Rose's eyes. It's the slow and steady build-up regarding the threat, and then bam, we get to see the Doctor in his glory. Then it tones back down to see the investigation of the Doctor, adding to that sense of mystery where we see Rose and the Doctor meeting back up again to defeat the Autons. We get our first glimpses of the history of the Time War and the Doctor being secretive about it. I think this was a very good introductory episode to new fans and old fans alike. It has that mysterious nature that can satisfy new and old fans, as the new fans don't really know who the Doctor even is, and the old fans can see the Doctor becoming mysterious again, like he was in the early years. While it may not be perfect to the standards of today, what makes it work is those various elements of mystery seeing it through the eyes of a companion, while bringing back a small but recognizable villain. Now to the very good stories with number 8, and this might surprise quite a few people, The Long Game. I think the low expectations helped this one majorly. I didn't really expect a lot from this episode, so I ended up enjoying it more. Is it good? Not incredibly, but I think the good outweighs the bad, even by a smidgen. While the idea of not trusting the news isn't anything new in science fiction, I think the way it's portrayed in this episode makes that idea in this specific episode more relevant than it could have been. There is a reason why things become tropes to begin with. Their ideas fucking work, and here is no exception. I really liked the character of Kathika and how she pretty much became a better companion than Adam for this episode. While I think the idea of Adam doesn't go as far as it could have, as some of the ideas felt half-baked and at times he almost felt on the right. And I do like that idea of a companion becoming a companion for the wrong reasons. But his story felt off to me because how the Doctor kind of just forgets about him, then gets angry when he does something stupid. So while the intriguing idea is there, the execution felt muddled. The overall story is good, as I said, despite a rather tired trope. I still think it works because of how some things have become so relevant nowadays. The villain is decent, I just wish Simon Pegg's talents were put elsewhere in a better place under a better executed story than here. But despite that, Pegg still does a magnificent job. Overall, it's a good episode. It does fail at a lot of things, but my enjoyment and the things that I liked outweigh the bad for me personally. Number 7 is Aliens of London / World War III. Yes, the two-parter with the farting aliens. But honestly, despite some dated comedy and a bit of dated CGI, it's a well-done two-part story. It feels like a natural progression of events and a well-done mystery. I will say though, the diversion with the pig alien thing is actually a pretty decent effect, surprisingly. I also kind of like that the aliens are a bit two-dimensional. I know I usually complain about villains with not a lot of depth, but considering that it's one small family of criminals who intend to enact their plan, and not the entire race was evil, is refreshing. The plan is also quite simple, with scorching the earth and selling it as a fuel source. It's a pretty neat idea because it shows what is normally a very human flaw is in other races as well. It's not the first time this has been done in Doctor Who, but I think the way it was written by Davies makes it work despite it being rather simple. Similar to The Long Game, I think it also helped I had really low expectations for this episode because it has the Slitheen in it. And even though I think Boomtown is a much greater improvement in terms of involving the Slitheen, I think this was quite a good story. Although I will state that the second episode is much better than the first, as it was a bit darker in tone and was more intriguing despite a good build-up. Number 6 is The Unquiet Dead. I do think there's a lot going for this episode, despite some, again, dodgy CGI and it being a bit too overexposed. I think it manages to do a lot right. I do think it's a proper horror episode, but not going too far. It definitely has those darker themes and is a good balance of the modern idea of horror as well as it being woven into a more gothic setting. The character of Gwyneth is very likable and sort of has that balance between naivety as well as that broader understanding of things, mainly when it comes to her powers, if that makes sense. I also like how Charles Dickens was treated in this story. It is sort of a proto-Vincent and the Doctor type thing. While it doesn't tug at your heartstrings as much as that, and I do prefer that episode, I think the handling of Charles Dickens in this episode where he gets a new outlook on life and wants to continue his work is genuinely heartwarming despite a rather bittersweet ending. I also love the chemistry between him and the Doctor. It's definitely a major highlight. The Gelth are also really good villains and a really interesting idea. After seeing the original Doctor Who having so many humanoid-like villains, it was nice to see villains taking the form of gas. With all these bits, there is a lot great in it. However, the story is a bit weak. I think the idea that the Gelth are the good guys and then they betray them because they resemble angry spirits was a bit tiresome, and something we've seen before, but not in a good way. In addition, there isn't really a lot new done with the villains. So, despite getting a lot right in terms of performances, tone, themes, and several ideas, the story does fall a bit flat for me, which stops it from being great. However, it's still a very good episode. Now we get into the great stories with number 5, Boomtown. I think this definitely rectifies the sillier aspects with the Slitheen in the Aliens of London story. While I do wish this episode could have gone for another adventure showcasing another villain, I think that everything about this episode is so goddamn good that it's really a small nitpick. This is most definitely a filler episode done right. Just focusing on Blaine and her quest to destroy the Earth to finally leave it was definitely interesting, and because of that simpler idea, the episode felt more engaging. Plus, it ends up being more character-driven for most involved. We get some great back and forth with Blaine and the Doctor. Not only is it funny, especially when she tries to kill him, but it also brings about more mysterious ideas and emotions when it comes to this Doctor, explaining how letting one person live doesn't justify the horrors she's done, and how he talks like he knows from experience. Deep down, he's talking about himself, and she recognizes this as well. Just one of the many great moments from Eccleston's Doctor. I also think this one handles the villain betrayal better than the Unquiet Dead, mainly because it starts out with a villain who you know is evil, a villain that has killed in this episode already, so you know they're the bad guy. So when Blaine is letting that woman live, recognizing the Doctor's experience with genocide and having that idea that she'll be given the death penalty, there is a sort of sympathy in a weird sort of way. You know deep down that, yeah, they're a bad guy, and they'll do anything to live. So the betrayal isn't conceived as some sort of magical twist, it's shown as obvious and bittersweet. And the ending, there is that hope that she does genuinely become good one day. So overall, I think this is a well done filler episode that manages to get a lot right in terms of its characters and slowing everything down so that the audience can catch their breath, but still give us some fun action and deeper character studies with the Doctor and the villain. Now it's time for number 4, Father's Day. A very well written, character driven story similar to Boomtown, but done much better and is more heartwarming and emotional. RTD intended to make the perfect time travel story, and in many ways he did. It showcases the idea of looking through rose-tinted glasses after someone has passed, only seeing the good and not recognizing the bad. Seeing Rose not only lose her father twice, but seeing what really happened with her mother and father, and what they were really like during their marriage, is heartbreaking and shows true development for the character, as well as showing what not all of us can see, the events that really happen, and not just the broader strokes of history, but the little moments. the tiny personal moments that matter to us. Also showing the conversations between Rose and Pete and how he slowly comes to the realization of who she really is. You see where certain attributes of Rose's smarts and curiosity comes from. I think the actor who plays Pete, Sean Dingwall, did a really good job as Pete in showing the little aspects that would become part of Rose's character. And while nothing ever really came of the Reapers after this, despite many paradoxes regarding the timeline in later episodes, I still think they're a very intriguing idea in regards to the world building of the timeline. Overall, it was a very well executed episode that dealt with so many great moments in regards to Pete and Rose, with their moments together and moments apart. How we see that not everything is as great as we think they are, or as great as we remember them, as well as the Reapers being a great concept in theory despite becoming somewhat lost after this episode. Now we get into the amazing stories with number 3, Bad Wolf / Parting of the Ways. Everything comes ahead to this. We finally see the Ninth Doctor say goodbye in this story, as well as all of his character development coming to a head. So not only is this a great regeneration story, but it's a great story by itself, as well as a great cap for the Ninth Doctor's arc of him dealing with the Time War. Not only do we see what was being set up in the long game, but we also see an ending arc for the Daleks as well. Just everything fucking works in this story, how everything just comes together perfectly to form a great send-off for the Ninth Doctor. Yes, the stuff with the deadly game shows in Bad Wolf is a bit cheesy, but I think the rest of the first episode and the second episode more than make up for it. While in Dalek, we see a very different side to the Dalek race, as well as a different side to the Doctor, and we'll get to that soon enough. Here, they represent more of their long-held attributes. We see in his final moments the Doctor truly acting like the Doctor the most. While I will argue that Nine's version of the Doctor encompasses every great attribute of the Doctor, here we just see it the most represented, I guess you can say. He comes to terms with what he has done, what he can do to rectify that, and ultimately makes the right decision, even if that means the Daleks reign supreme once again. As well as his final moments in regeneration still being the best of New Who when all the other ones come off as circle-jerking their eras in big dramatic speeches and vanity horseshit. But we'll get there when we get there. Overall, this was a terrific story. Every plotline and arc come through. We see the Doctor truly becoming deserving of that title. We see Bad Wolf come to a head. We see the Daleks in their triumphant return. And the Ninth Doctor finally says goodbye. Everything about the story works, and I can't help but think it's just fantastic. Number 2, which might be a surprise to some people, but The Empty Child / The Doctor Dances. There is a bit of history for this episode for me personally. I started watching Doctor Who in early 2010. In April of 2010, I watched The Empty Child for the first time. For the next few months, I stopped watching Doctor Who because not only did this scare the piss out of me, but I watched it the same day as Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which was a movie that permanently fucked me up, mainly with the ending. So revisiting this episode again, especially now knowing the critical acclaim it has, was an interesting experience. Especially when I started watching the show again way back when, I skipped the second episode because I was too scared. But I finally gave it a watch in full and no longer being scared of my own shadow, and it is just as excellent as everyone says it is. I will say that the second episode was not as good as the first episode, as the creepiness and intrigue does kind of go a bit downhill. However, it's a minor nitpick. The kid is incredibly creepy, and the backdrop of the London bombings was a perfect setting for the episode. While the ending could be seen as a bit tiresome nowadays, back when Stephen Moffat didn't ruin every character with a happy ending, this one actually worked, mainly because of how well it ties into the Doctor's arc for this season, and is a good juxtaposition against the premise, tone, and setting, as well as giving us the introduction of Captain Jack Harkness, which is always a plus. The constant bickering between him and the Doctor was hilarious, but it never took away from what was going on in the actual episode. Rose is given a bit of a backseat this episode, but the fact that this heavily ties into the Doctor's arc for the series, it wasn't too bad actually. Overall, a very great episode with very little wrong with it, with the only thing I can think of is that the first episode is better than the second episode. That of course leads us to number 1, and that is Dalek. Usually when it comes to ranking the first series / the Ninth Doctor's episodes, The Empty Child two-parter is usually number 1. Not all the time, but most of the time from what I've seen, it is. But I've gotta say, Dalek impressed me more. The only thing I dislike about it is that I wish bringing back the Daleks was a bit more of a surprise. Call the episode something else, tweak the cold open, and have the first confrontation between Doctor and Dalek be the first time we figure out who the villain this episode is really about. When we hear that familiar voice once more, that would have been such a great reveal. But despite all of that, it still is an absolutely tremendous episode. Similar to my number 2 pick, it once again ties into the Doctor's arc this season in regards to the Time War, but this time on a darker and more emotional note. With this though, and where this episode succeeds more so than the Empty Child story, is that Rose is integral to the episode. She ties into the whole rivalry, I guess you can call it, between the Doctor and the Dalek. Through her, the Dalek becomes more human thanks to Rose's DNA, and she's the only one who shows him kindness, not knowing of the Dalek threat. On top of that, you have the Doctor becoming the darkest he has ever been, in a more character-driven and emotional sense, with even the Dalek stating, "You would make a good Dalek," which still sends chills down my spine. It all takes place in a large bunker and takes the Doctor Who stereotype of running down corridors from a generic alien threat to a new height, with making the action going on actually scary and having it actually mean something, instead of being an empty plot and villain with no meaning, as well as reiterating what was done in Remembrance of the Daleks by having the Dalek actually fly, smashing that argument as well. Robert Shearman has shown time and time again in regards to the Whoniverse that he will always create something truly spectacular. Holy Terror, Chimes of Midnight, Jubilee, which this was based on, and this, he is just such a terrific talent, and this episode encapsulates everything that makes him such a great writer. Really wish he was running the show right now instead of Chibnall. Now we get into the companions, with the worst being Adam Mitchell, just sort of by default. While I do like how RTD wanted to showcase the companion who couldn't in regards to a companion wanting to use time travel for his own selfish gain, it does fall flat. Mainly because the Doctor just kind of lets Adam fuck off for most of the episode and is surprised when he goes off and does something stupid, as I said before. You let loose a kid from the 21st century into a world millennia upon millennia ahead of his own. Why are you shocked when he does something stupid? But even with all that, it still has a good idea, despite not being executed all that well. On top of that, Adam was kind of forgettable and a blank slate, and the only personality trait he had was dick. While likable in Dalek, even if a bit pompous, the next episode treats him like a whole new character, and it's a bit jarring. With Adam, everything is kind of muddled. While he's based on a good idea, said idea was executed poorly. Because of that idea, he lacks a good character, because his character was never intended to go anywhere. Kind of like Proto-Clara in a way, but not quite as bad. Next is Rose. While with the 10th Doctor, her relationship with him became eye-rolling and questionable, here she was very good. She was the perfect archetype for people to be reintroduced into the world of Doctor Who. A very simple companion who worked a simple job and was easily identifiable with the audience. With that, she was caring and clearly learned from her experiences with the Doctor, as well as her arc becoming Bad Wolf. While in the giant pit of companions, she's nothing special, especially with how ear-gratingly annoying she became later on. In terms of the 9th Doctor era, she was great and a perfect introduction companion for the revival. Then finally, for the best companion, we have Captain Jack. I mean, need I say more? It's fucking Captain Jack. He's awesome, despite only appearing in 5 episodes. Moving on. Now to get to the Doctor and his era. Due to the popularity of the 10th Doctor, unfortunately, the 9th Doctor gets pretty shafted despite being superior in every way. This version of the Doctor was the perfect way to start a revival, and that the new series meant business. He had a simple costume, an actor who didn't really do children's television, as well as being helmed by a longtime fan of the show who knew how to write a story. With 9, he was the PTSD Doctor, having pulled the trigger to end the last great Time War, ending the confrontation between the Time Lords and the Daleks. He had darker aspects to his character that were executed properly and from the get-go, unlike 7, but luckily he got rectified through Big Finish and VNAs. He struggled with having done what he did to end the Time War and then learned it was all for naught by the end of the series. He had darker aspects, yet I still found that so much throughout the season, he acted the most like the Doctor out of any incarnation. Due to the fact that he was dealing with his trauma, he strived to be even better at helping people than all of his other incarnations, because of what he did. And I feel because of that, he was the most Doctor-like. He may not be as kooky as 4, or as outwardly intelligent as 3, or as alien as 1, but through his actions and his strive to be better, similar to his first incarnation, he felt more like the Doctor than any other version. It's similar to the way that comedians are the most depressed people because they know what it's like to feel horrible and worthless, and they don't want others to feel like that, so they strive to make people laugh. The Doctor committed genocide against his own people, so he needed to save just as many people as the ones he lost. Meanwhile, having a companion like Rose throughout Series 1 helped rediscover his more human aspects, truly helped him through his grief, and guided him into a more happy-go-lucky and human incarnation of the 10th Doctor. Which is one of the reasons why I can't bring myself to hate Rose as a character, despite almost everything after Series 1 completely ruining her character, because she did so much for the Doctor during this incarnation. With all of that, Christopher Eccleston does an absolutely magnificent job as the Doctor, especially now when he revealed what he was going through at the time and him powering through it, with lining up the Doctor's arc for the series made it work on every possible level. Him actually having an arc and growing as a character was also a really great idea, and something that hadn't really been done since the first Doctor. Despite lesser episodes like Long Game, End of the World, and the Aliens of London two-parter, I still really liked what this era had to offer. Not only the arc for the Doctor, but also some of the best horror stories since maybe the fourth Doctor. We had a fleshed out companion, well-written stories, great villains, and a perfect balance of lighter aspects for children, but darker aspects for the more teenage or older audience. Perfectly riding that line of introducing new fans without the need of bombarding them with references they don't understand, but keeping in tune with the tone, ideas, and concepts of Doctor Who from the classic era, and something old fans would recognize. Overall, the 9th Doctor's era, despite it being very short, unfortunately, was exceptional. In combination with the Doctor growing as a character, Rose being a fleshed out companion, having well-written stories and a great arc, everything about this era/series worked. If I had to rank him anywhere, I would put him 4th. So that does that. Next we have the next Doctor Who ranked with FUCK!